tonight we're going to be at Psalm 37. I think I might have mentioned this when we first started. When Brian was putting this together, he asked Tyler and I to pick 6 Psalms apiece. And I have the good fortune of every night that I'm teaching, I believe it's planned out that I'll be teaching a psalm that I chose. So again, I don't have a good reason to not be able to do that. But so this is good that it was something I was able to look at and choose. And for whatever reason, I'd said, yeah, this is one. I mean, they're all good psalms, of course, but it's good to be able to pick out ones that you chose and teach about those. Psalm 37, that's where we're going to be at tonight. It's 40 verses long. 40 verses. It would be considered a teaching or wisdom song. And this is where it's going to be a little technical. We're not going to harp on this too much, but I will return to this in just a moment after we read through the psalm. It is technically an alphabetic acrostic of 22 alternating pairs of stanzas, also known as strophes. Okay, that may not make a bit of sense to you, right? We'll try to break it down a little bit here after we read the psalm through here. But that's according to Brian, that's where we're at, and I'm sure he looked at some other expert opinions on that as well besides his own. All right, let's go to the first verse here. What I'm going to do is, in putting together the outline, Brian, even though it says that there are 22 strophes, we're not breaking it down into the 22 strophes, but we are going to try to break it down as far as reading it through. A lot of times what I've done in the past is I would have you read, or somebody, or maybe a couple people, read through the entire chapter that we were looking at of any given book in the Bible. But tonight I think it would be helpful to, as we go through the beginning and read through, we'll take it section by section as it's kind of broken down logically into a way that flows better and stops. And because otherwise, when you're reading 40 verses of a psalm, it can kind of run together a little bit. It's good to break it down, I think. And Brian has broken it down into 5 different segments, you might say, that kind of naturally flow because of what they're focused on there. The first one that we're going to look at, the first group of verses, will be verses 1 through 6. 1 through 6. And I'm going to, and by the way, if I ask you to read, and you just don't feel like reading for whatever reason, you don't have to explain yourself at all. Just say, I'd rather not, or whatever, and I'll either read it or I'll pick someone else. Okay, just don't want to put anyone on the spot, right? You have to read. Don't feel like you have to read if you don't want to. But Tommy, would you read verses 1 through 6 here of Psalm 37?
Do not fret because of evildoers, nor be envious of the workers of iniquity, for they shall soon be cut down like the grass, and wither as the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and feed on his faithfulness. Delight yourself also in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. He shall bring forth your righteousness as the light, and your justice as the noonday.
Okay, thank you. This we could describe this as an encouragement to trust in the Lord's deliverance. And we are going to look more closely at verses 1 through 4 here momentarily, but you could break it down into 1 through 6. So again, this is kind of an encouragement to trust in the Lord's deliverance, but we'll look more closely at it in a moment. The next we'll look at, the next segment, so to speak, it will be verses 7 through 11. And I'm going to ask Joanne, would you mind reading for us? 7 through 11 there in verse, or I should say, Psalm 37.
Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret because of him who prospers in his way, because of the man who brings wicked schemes to pass. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Do not fret, it only causes harm. For evildoers shall be cut off, but those who wait on the Lord, they shall inherit the earth. For yet a little while, and the wicked shall be no more. Indeed, you will look carefully for his place, but it shall be no more. But the meek shall inherit the earth, and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace.
Thank you. This could be described as God's retribution as a comfort. Now, we don't often think of, retribution as a comfort. I guess it depends on who the retribution is directed toward, whom it's coming from, etc. But if you are a follower of God, there is some comfort to be found in knowing that there will be retribution on those who prosper and yet are evil, etc., etc. But we're not going to look closely at any verses in that segment, but they kind of overlap with some other things that we're looking at here in Psalm 37. But I wanted to read it nonetheless. All right, let's go on to the next segment. It's a little bit larger. This will be verses 12 through 26. And Dick, if you don't mind, if you could read 12 through 26 verses in Psalm 37.
Wicked plots against the just, and gnashes at him with his teeth. The Lord laughs at him, for he sees that his day is coming. The wicked have drawn the sword, and have bent their bow to cast down the poor and needy, to slay those who are upright conduct. Their swords shall enter their own heart, and their bows shall be broken. Lord, make me to know my end, and what is the measure of my days, that I may know how frail I am. I got 2 pages instead of 1 there.
Okay, yeah. So what did you finish on there? I'm sorry, I was looking at my notes.
15. The sword shall enter their
Sorry.
heart, and the bow shall be broken. 16. A little that a righteous man has is better than the riches of any wicked. For the arms of the wicked shall be broken, but the Lord upholds the righteous. The Lord knows the days of the upright, and their inheritance shall be forever. They shall not be ashamed in the evil time, and in the days of famine they shall be satisfied. But the wicked shall perish, and the enemies of the Lord, like the splendor of the meadow, shall vanish. Into smoke they shall vanish away. The wicked borrows and does not repay, but the righteous shows mercy and gives. For those blessed by him shall inherit the earth, but those cursed by him shall be cut off. The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delights in his way. Though he falls, he shall not be utterly cast down, for the Lord upholds him with his hand. I have been young, and now I am old, yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his descendants begging bread. He is ever merciful and lends, and his descendants are blessed.
Okay, appreciate that. We could describe this segment of the psalm as a contrast of the ways of the righteous and the wicked. And you see this in different psalms, of course, and to some degree throughout the Bible. But this is something we'll look at more closely. We'll look at 2 groups, smaller groups of passages within this larger group. We'll look at that. This is kind of the heart of this, you might say. All right, let's go on to the 4th segment of Psalm 37. This will be verses 27 through 33. And Catherine, would you mind reading that, 27 through 33?
Depart from evil and do good, and abide forevermore. For the Lord loves justice and does not forsake his saints. They are preserved forever, but the descendants of the wicked will be cut off. The righteous will inherit the land and dwell on it forever. The mouth of the righteous utters wisdom, and their tongue speaks justice. The law of their God is in their heart, none of their steps will slip. The wicked watch the righteous and seek to kill them. The Lord will not forsake them to their hand, nor condemn them when they are judged.
Okay, very good. And like the second segment, we're not going to return to any specific verses in this segment, but again, it goes along with a lot of what we'll be talking about. And then lastly, the last segment, you might say, of 37 here, I'm going to let the outline author go ahead and read that, if he will, 34 through 40, verses 34 through 40.
Hope in the Lord and keep his way, and he will exalt you to inherit the land. When the wicked are cut off, you will see it. I have seen the wicked in great power, and spreading himself like a luxurious tree. Yet he passed away and was not. I sought him, but he could not be found. Mark the blameless man and consider the upright, for the end of that man is peace. But the transgressors will be destroyed together. The end of the wicked is to be cut off, but the salvation of the righteous is from the Lord. He is their refuge in time of distress. The Lord will help them and deliver them He will deliver them from the wicked and save them because they take refuge in him.
Very good. And I neglected to kind of give a descriptor of that fourth segment. We could call that an admonition to live wisely because of divine retribution, right? So that's one way to look at it is there's retribution to be made, to happen. You want to be on the right side of that if at all possible. And then this last segment we read, this is kind of again related to an encouragement to trust in the Lord and his deliverance. So we read through all of that. Just a little technicality or two here just for your edification, for more of the academic side of things, and then we'll get into the meat of what all of this means. Again, this is it's a wisdom psalm. It's one of David's psalms. It's also an acrostic. That's not a word you run across a lot. Acrostic. Can anyone tell me what that means? Want to impress everyone with your vocabulary besides Brian or Kathy? They work people closely together. She can look over it now. She probably knows as much as he does or more. But anyway. Okay, there we go, Ann. Go ahead and say it out loud.
Each letter makes a word.
Okay, it's basically a poem or a series of lines with certain letters, and usually it's the first letter of the line, and it can send a message, a name, different things like that. Also, I mentioned these strophes, and I did look it up in the dictionary. What's great these days, when I was a kid looking at, or even in high school, college, when I would try to figure out the pronunciation of something, I had to kind of like read it. Now you just get on the internet, right? You say, you want to know the pronunciation? Okay, here it is. In fact, this even broke it down. You can hear the UK pronunciation, or you can hear the American pronunciation. So I'm confident that it is strophe. But a strophe is it's the first. I'm going to go just straight out read what the outline said. It's the first of a pair of stanzas of alternating form on which the structure of a given poem is based. And then also from the this is really, you're really going deep into the annals here. From the 1901 Jewish Encyclopedia, it can also be defined as a union of several lines into one rhythmic poem. So it's the way it's structured, it's combining lines to give meaning. Now, mnemonic, I've always called that mnemonic, so I'm glad I looked this up. Mnemonic, because this business of an acrostic, the letters at the front of the lines forming something here. And it's alphabetical, we already mentioned that. It provides a mnemonic. Now, who can tell me what a mnemonic is? And it can be either a noun or an adjective.
It helps you remember something like the planet.
Okay, excellent. Well, and you're delving into science here. I couldn't resist this. I was not a very good student in junior high school, I'll be honest with you, right? But there is a mnemonic aid that my biology teacher used. And I can still remember it to this day. Even though I hardly ever paid attention to anything that was going on. I'd be drawing things and stuff. But you couldn't help it. It was such a good one that it stuck with me all these years. And I was no biology major in college. Can anyone tell me what that would be? What is that mnemonic aid that you should remember? Donna's already got her hand up. I'll let her steal the thunder. From biology class, what would it be?
My dad was a biology teacher. King Philip came over for good spaghetti.
Okay, and you know what's interesting? That's what I remember too. Although when I was looking it up, just to make sure I wasn't wrong on that, in the internet, some teachers apparently say great spaghetti. I don't know. Maybe it's a cultural, geographical thing. My teacher in Central Florida, where we were both from, called it good spaghetti, but some call it great spaghetti. So I don't know. Maybe if you're from New York City where they have good spaghetti, maybe it's, I don't know, they call it great. They want to go higher than that. I don't know. But what does that mean? A better question is, what does that stand for? Let's see if you really remember what those are supposed to stand for.
Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species.
Excellent. All right, you get the gold star then. How many others, just be honest, remembered that saying or had encountered that? Nobody else remembered that or had that in school? Wow, that's interesting. That maybe a Brevard County thing. I don't know, but I definitely
I
stood.
was also a biology major.
But you probably learned it at Cocoa, didn't you, before you went to college?
Probably.
Maybe I was an advanced student at junior high and didn't even know it. I don't know. In any event, but here's the thing. I've mentioned all this thing. We're having fun with it a little bit. I think the mnemonic structure, or mnemonic, structure in this instance is in the Hebrew, right? It doesn't help us now, right? We can't use the English language and be able, because I was looking and I said, no, this is not helping me at all, you know. So what we've done instead is we've broken it down into segments based on logical order and what they revolve around and all that. But I thought that was interesting just because it gave me a chance to remember that and say it out loud again. And I was impressed with myself that I actually remembered that mnemonic device after all these years. I guess that's testament to my teacher. All right, let's go back real quick, and I'm just going to read through this real quick, the verses 1 through 4, because we're going to look at that first segment as we move ahead here. And that's 1 through 4. Again, this is kind of an encouragement to trust in the Lord's deliverance. And I'll go ahead and read what it literally says again. And this is from the New King James Version. Do not fret because of evildoers, nor be envious of the workers of iniquity, for they shall soon be cut down like the grass and wither as the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good, dwell in the land and feed on his faithfulness. Delight yourself also in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart. You know, it's interesting, we go back to the first verse there. It says, do not fret because of evildoers, nor be envious of the workers of iniquity. You know, fret is not a term we use a lot, but every once in a while I'll come up. Sometimes I know I'm fretting, you know. So I'm fretting here. I'm kind of scrambling. I'm fretting. I'm worried about something. Maybe it's not even my business to be worried about. You know what I'm saying? That's kind of what fretting means to me a little bit. But do we not do that? Do we do that as Christians in this modern day period? Do we not fret? And in some cases, become envious over people that we consider, you know, evil or not the best of character, etc. And they seem to be getting wildly wealthy. They seem to have lots of power. We'll stay out of politics. We're not going to go there. But you know, that's a place where obviously, depending on what your political preference is, you may be fretting more than other times. But the envy too. The envy is something that we can still relate to now as Christians. That there is a temptation, which obviously I think comes from the devil, right? There's a devilish temptation there to envy people that they're not following the rules. They don't bow their knee to God. They don't respect his basic tenets. They do all these things that are contrary to what we can tell from the Word of God, and yet they seem to be living fabulously, right? I mean, they really do. It's interesting, in this outline here, Brian drew from a number of theologians, people that wrote commentaries. This is not stuff, and I'm going to be reading a little bit from it, what he put together out of those commentaries and things. These are not from like the 1950s. They're not from the even early 1900s. These are people that wrote in the 1600s, the 1700s, and at the latest in the 1800s. So we have this. It's interesting to see what they say about, you know, their analysis of what this psalm indicates back, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, or more, even in some cases. And then we can, look, of course, at the original, what it was saying way back before then. But then we can also, by taking the original, looking at what people said, scholars of the Bible. It's one of these interesting things. Some of these people were Church of England bishops and stuff. Okay, now, if we were probably in a debate with somebody who was a member of the Church of England, and we were in London, we were at a coffee shop or something, we probably would be tempted to say, well, they don't know the Bible very much because it's very ritualistic there. It's the state church. We know a lot more about the Bible than they do. And maybe in this modern era, that might be a safe assumption. And I'm not saying we would agree with all these gentlemen on every doctrine either. Things like baptism and once saved, always saved, and things, we could pick a bunch of those types of things. But nevertheless, they have done scholarly work on this. They've pored over the scriptures, the original language, etc., etc. These are learned men that have devoted their lives, they're long gone now, devoted their lives to this subject. And I think we can, obviously Brian felt he could learn things from it or fortify what he already knows. And so I think it's interesting to look at what they said. And I apologize if it sounds like I'm just reading. I'm going to try to not read completely, right? But there's some interesting, the language is a little different, but there's some excerpts that I think is something that could be useful to look at. Let's look from, this is Matthew Henry was his name. He was a British author of a Bible commentary from the early 1700s. Here's one of the things he said. We are tempted to think them, he's talking about the evildoers, we are tempted to think them the only happy people, and to incline to imitate them, and to join ourselves with them, that we may share in their gains and eat of their, this is really old school, dainties. And this is that which we are warned against. I thought this was very interesting, this part right here. Listen to what he says. This is, fretfulness and envy are sins that are their own punishments. They are their own punishment. See, I mean, that's, to me, that kind of struck me a little bit. I'll finish what he says here, and then I'll go back to that. He says, they are the uneasiness of the spirit and the rottenness of the bones. It is therefore in kindness, this is also interesting, listen to this. It is therefore in kindness to ourselves that we are warned against them. You know, there's things in the Bible that say, don't do this, don't do that, etc., etc. And sometimes we have a hard time understanding, well, how does that, I understand, yes, I will obey it because this is what God said. It may seem in my own private heart, it seems arbitrary, and why do I have to do this? But when you think about it, this is especially for the benefit of those back then, for the benefit of those in the 16 or 1700s, and to the benefit of us now. Why is that? Why is that? Somebody tell me, why are these especially this admonition to not fret over the success of evil people, or just even, I guess, run-of-the-mill people who don't follow God? Or why should we not envy? How does that help us in a way other than just being on the right side of God? Anyone want to tell me that? Anyone want to volunteer an answer to that? How is that helping us, do you think?
When you're fretting or when you're worrying, you get yourself all stewed up over things, and there's no need in it because you can't change it. You know, like you were saying, if you're fretting over something that doesn't even pertain to you, that you can't do anything about. And I think those are some of the best tools that Satan has in his toolbox. If he can keep us fretting and worrying and all of that, then we're not doing what God wants us to do.
We're not angels, we're humans.
Right.
And so I guess even angels have a free will, right? But we are in this earthly environment, and in many ways we have a lot in common with each other, right? I mean, our everyday existence and things we aspire to, things we want. We have the same earthly desires for food. We like warm, comfortable things, etc. But the envy too, right? They say, envy, what does envy do to one's heart? Even we shouldn't forget about, but putting aside what it does to us spiritually, but how about your physical condition when you're always envying and all that? Have you ever known, I'm not going to ask you to pick out who they were, maybe you were one of those people yourself, where it just seemed like they were constantly envying other people. And usually this is obviously somebody, a lot of times, they probably didn't have a lot growing up. They didn't have power, and they see others around them, and I tell you what, I feel, in a lot of ways, we're fortunate. Our children are fortunate to be here in Union County and growing up in Union County, or grandchildren in some cases, or great-grandchildren, I think of you, because this is not a materialistic place. Union County is not, when people talk about Florida, Palm Beach, ritzy and all, that's not Union County. And I'm not saying that in a derogatory way, but I'm telling you, Union County is a place where, yes, we've got some people who have big houses, et cetera, but this is not a place where people judge one another by their materialistic goods so much. You know what I'm saying? This is one of the, to be honest with you, if you look at the demographics of it, Union County is one of the lowest as far as income and socioeconomic, probably in the state. We are. But there's a sense of, I'm not saying there aren't people walking around think they're better than other people. There are. But generally speaking, a lot of people are in the same boat. A lot of people are at the same level socioeconomically. And I think that in some ways is perhaps a healthier environment. We all want the area to be prosperous. But I'm saying you go to a place like, you imagine if you live in Palm Beach, or you live, I would dare say, in parts of St. Petersburg and Tampa, some of South Tampa, very wealthy and all that. If you don't have that same wealth, you stick out. You stick out. I'll be honest, I will say, I'm harping too much. I grew up in Merritt Island. I grew up in Cocoa, down around the Cape. A lot of people down there, their parents worked at the Cape, and they were engineers, and made pretty good incomes. Lived on waterfront property and all that stuff. And I have to say, not having grown up in that environment, I always felt like, especially on Merritt Island where I grew up, I felt like, there's a little bit of a shallowness among a lot of my peers. Maybe it was in me too a little bit, but I just felt like there seems to be kind of this, I'll put it this way, when I went to other communities, I didn't sense it as much. I said, I kind of like these other communities better than the one I grew up in. Because where I grew up, it was kind of almost like people were always trying to outdo one another and impress other people from a financial standpoint and stuff like that. But that doesn't do us any good. So again, this is something that we can learn from. And also, let's put it this way. If you're worried about what this guy down the street is doing and how he's prospering, but he's not going to church on Sunday morning, you're getting your eye off the ball there. You know what I'm saying? You ought to be looking at his soul and realizing, look, this is a long-term game here. This is not, look, we're gone like that, right? That same person, this psalm harps on it really, is going to be like the grass. They'll be gone. Guess what? From a physical standpoint, so will you, and so will I. So the deeper things are what we have to look at here. Let's go on so we don't spend too much time on one segment. Let's go on to the next segment that we want to look at. And this is going to be verses, not the whole segment, but we'll look at a couple of verses within that segment that we described as the contrast of the ways of the righteous and wicked. It'll be 18 and 19, verses 18 and 19. Let me go ahead and read those real quickly here. The Lord knows the days of the upright, and their inheritance shall be forever. They shall not be ashamed in the evil time, and in the days of famine they shall be satisfied. How many are familiar with Charles Spurgeon? Right, that's a name that a lot of us know. He was a Baptist, a British Baptist. He's one of the more contemporary people that we have in the background information that Brian and I were looking at, and that he was around in the 1800s, but still not like recently, but in the 1800s. He's pretty famous. It's interesting. I've heard people talk about Spurgeon. A lot of times Baptists, their view on baptism, ironically, is a bit different than ours, right? They a lot of times say it's not really necessary. But I've read where Spurgeon was actually a bit more, nuanced about that. He didn't dismiss it as merely just some symbolic gesture. I understand that he did ascribe to it a greater meaning and practicality than a lot of Baptists we might meet on the street nowadays or wherever, or even back then. So that's just interesting to note about Spurgeon. But in any event, let me read what he says about verse 19 especially. He says, calamities will come, but deliverances will come also. As the righteous never reckon upon immunity from trouble, they will not be disappointed when they are called to take their share of it. That's interesting, right? I mean, and to be honest with you, if you just simply all the time, if you said, nothing bad will ever happen to me because I'm a Christian, right? My child, nothing will happen to her. My parents, all these people. We'll never have bad things happen just because we're promised perfection here, right? No, it doesn't say that. There is talk about protection. There's talk about deliverance. But we're going to have our hard knocks, right? In fact, we're going to have some, we're all going to die, right? That's another thing too. But you can't help but live in this life for very long. And if you're just going to rely on just purely, nothing bad is going to happen, no, you're going to be shattered. You're going to be shattered, right? Definitely. Well, let's continue on. But rather they will cast themselves anew upon their God and prove again his faithfulness and love. God is not a friend in the sunshine only. If ravens do not bring them bread and meat, the supply of their needs shall come in some other way, for their bread shall be given them. If God's providence is our inheritance, we need not worry about the price of wheat. Mildew and smut and bent are all in the Lord's hands. Unbelief cannot save a single ear from being blasted. But faith, if it do not preserve the crop, can do what is better, namely, preserve our joy in the Lord. Now, that's interesting. Saying there, he's saying, look, that's what verses are saying themselves. We're not spared calamity necessarily. But there's an opportunity for us as Christians to say, look, yes, something very bad has happened. I'm in real bad times, but I have something I can rely on. God, this is an opportunity, really, for God to show that He will provide for me during this time. Now, it's interesting we talk about famine. And Spurgeon, I think, talks about bread. What does he say here? He says, if ravens do not bring their bread and meat, the supply shall come from somewhere. That's a bold statement, right? That's a bold statement. Now, how many have seen, though? How many have seen with someone that you knew was a Christian, maybe a family member, maybe yourself even, and you didn't know how you were going to make it, you didn't know how they were going to make it? I mean, these days, most of us can find lots to eat, right? I'm proof that you can get a whole lot of food in your body, most of us at any time. But I dare say there's some people here that when they were small, I'm not going to point them out, but when they were small children, times were tougher, right? And maybe there really was the question of whether you're going to get bread to eat. But how many have seen, and sometimes it happens in almost an unexplainable way, right? Where a blessing has come to you in the form of food or money or sustenance, shelter, whatever it may be, a car to drive, etc., and it comes to you. And it's almost unexplainable, right? Except for you turn to God and say, praise God, He's provided for me. So, this is a bold statement. We're going to elaborate that on that in a moment, because when you talk about bread, and we're going to look at the term begging bread, this is an interesting question to look at. Does that mean that no Christian will ever go hungry? Will no Christian ever be forced to beg? Is that outright saying that or not? Let's go ahead and let's move on. Let's go on to the next subsection, we might say. I'm going to read verses 25 and 26. In fact, this talks about the begging of bread. 25 says, I have been young, and now I'm old. This is David speaking, of course. Yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his descendants begging bread. He is ever merciful and lends, and his descendants are blessed. Spurgeon had an interesting comment about this. He says this: this was David's observation. It is not my observation just as it stands. For I have relieved the children of undoubtedly good men who have appealed to me as common, fancy 19th century language here, mendicants. What does that mean? Beggars. But this does not cast a doubt upon the observation of David. He lived under a dispensation more outward and more of this world than the present rule of personal faith. That's an interesting statement there, isn't it? And that strikes home with me a little bit in the form of when I read from the Old Testament, and then I read from the New Testament. Now, there you can see some crossover, no doubt about it. But is it not so that when you look at the Old Testament, doesn't it seem like things were done more outwardly? There was a more outward thing. There was the sacrifice to God that was made with outward appearance of animals and stuff. And there was an outward type thing. I'm not saying there wasn't an inner aspect to it, but it seems more actions, outward stuff. Whereas in the New Testament, especially once you get, with the Gospels, but also what was later written by the apostles and whatnot, you see that there seems to be more of a focus on the internal than maybe what you saw in the Old Testament a little bit. You know what I'm saying? So it's interesting that what God may have chosen to do as far as providing for people in the Old Testament may be a bit different than how we see it done in the New Testament. And now, I'm not saying completely different, but there may have been a heavier reliance upon that to show other people as well around the Israelites, etc., about being provided for and things. Just something to think about there. That's something that I think Spurgeon was picking up there. But he goes on. He says, never are the righteous forsaken. That is a rule without exception. Seldom indeed do their seed beg bread. And although it does occasionally occur through dissipation, idleness, or some other causes on the part of their sons, yet doubtless it is so rare a thing that there are many alive who never saw it. He's saying that, and back when he said this observation was David's, he's saying, look, it's so rare to see a follower of God begging that David had never seen it. He had never seen it. He's saying that isn't necessarily a solid rule. No Christian will ever have to be in the position of begging. I dare say there have been Christians in India that maybe have resorted to begging. I don't know for sure, but notice what the verse says. It says, "Yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his descendants begging bread." David's saying he's not seen it. He didn't say it's absolutely impossible, did he? He said, "I've not seen it." So to me, that's, in other words, when you're having an apologetics moment with somebody, and somebody says, this verse says, look, no Christians will ever be poor and never need any food. Well, so wait a second, what is David really saying here? He's saying he hadn't seen it, and that's the general rule, I would say. Are there exceptions where somebody could be in a spot? In fact, do we not have sometimes in our own congregation people who need to be helped by others, or maybe they would not have a meal? But that doesn't say God's not providing. But he provides through us, does he not? We are his hands and feet. But I just thought that was interesting, the way he... but here goes on. We just finish up what Spurgeon said, because this is, I think, also pretty impactful. It says, "Poor ministers' sons often become rich. I have seen families of the poor godly become rich, and have seen the Lord reward the faithfulness of the father in the success of the son. So that I have often thought that the best way to endow one's seed with wealth is to become poor for Christ's sake." I'm going to ask the question, but I know for a fact that there are people sitting in this room right now that have seen in this very community, I would say, if you look back over the last, no one's here 100 years old, right? But if you just happen to look back 100 years, some people who have family represented right here, right now, they would say, look, the grandfather, the great-grandparents, they didn't have much money. They barely got, they had what they had, just barely could get by with it. But they have children and grandchildren who are quite prosperous, who are very prosperous, right? And yes, ma'am.
But, I also think, too, part of that is the values that are instilled about a righteous person that really facilitates.
Absolutely. And that's why he's saying, I think Spurgeon is saying, look, if you want to have kids and grandkids that are prosperous, don't focus so much on the stock market and teaching them about things like that. Rather, bring them to church and expose them to the gospel and the values that the Bible throughout mentions: hard work, respect for other people, and all these sorts of things. That will get you down the road some prosperity. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I don't think, what is it that you define as being prosperous? If you have the wealth of knowledge of the people of God, of what salvation ultimately is, you might feel forsaken in this present moment, in this present time, in the earthly realm, but you're not going to be forsaken where it really matters. But what to you is wealth? Does it mean, I've never seen the righteous begging bread? Does it mean that I'm always going to have food? Maybe physical food I won't always have, but I always have spiritual food if I'm righteous.
And it's one of those things where I've heard this said. Some of you follow Dave Ramsey a little bit, here and there. One thing he said is some people get mad at wealthy, especially Christians. Sometimes say, "Look, all the big house and they're all." But as he points out, now there's exceptions to this, but a lot of times people who become wealthy, it's a matter of how many people are they serving, right? If you serve a small number of people, you may never become really wealthy. But the more people you serve with something like an item that you've invented, something that makes people's lives better, et cetera, the more people you serve, the greater your wealth typically will be. Again, if you are in a business. Now, there are people that have served lots of people that never became wealthy. And I only got about halfway through this. So.
But again, what's your definition of wealth?
Right. And the Reader's Digest version of all this, by the way, is that what really matters is the long term, of course, and one of the biggest reasons why it's foolishness to sit there and envy those who are wealthy but not living for God right now is, look, that day's coming soon, right? We're here, we're gone, and what is the long term? That's what really matters. And so I appreciate you. I can't tell as many stories next time because that gets me off, and I only got about halfway through what I wanted. But I appreciate. I think y'all get the gist of it, but I appreciate it.
You will go on ahead and mark in your psalm books, little book, number 266, Wonderful Story of Love. Wonderful Story of Love. Announcements and prayer requests that we have, we want to share at this time. Keep in mind, Itch Me is postponed due to the possibility of striking weather. The passage that Greg was from, and I tried to find independent confirmation, so I won't name the city and county. But an interesting way that you can make a decent return on your investment is by buying tax liens. You know, when people don't pay their taxes, you can go in, you can pay their taxes for them, and then when they finally decide to pay their taxes after 2, 3, 4, 5 years before they lose their property, then they come back, and sometimes you can get up to 18 or 20% return on your investment, and it's capitalized each year. And so a lot of people like to do that. And got a thing in my email that a lady had bought a tax lien on a condominium building, and after she had secured it, she went and drove to look at the property because it was time for it to be redeemed or time for her to be able to cash in, and there was no building. And as she reached out to the proper government agencies, the alleged reply came back that it was their prerogative to sell tax liens on properties that don't exist. And that was where they left it. Now you say, surely that didn't happen. Well, I wasn't able to confirm it or deny it, but I was able to find the address that doesn't exist. Even though it's listed as a property in that county and city's tax records, but it does not actually exist. So it was interesting. Well, a little bit of research I was able to find. And it got me to thinking about when Jesus said, resist not evil. And what Greg read to us from Psalm 37, fret not yourself. Fret not yourself. Of all the things that the devil has as a powerful weapon, we sometimes think that his best weapon is lying. People say, the devil is the father of lies. You know, yes, the devil is the father of lies. But every lie ultimately is built on a distraction. It's built on a distraction. And whether or not the story actually did occur because they were trying to sell, people to use their service for buying tax liens so that you wouldn't have happen to you what allegedly happened to that lady. It comes down to that thing of why forgive? Every moment we spend in unforgiveness, we're in a place of fret. We're in a place of troubling ourselves. You say, but brother, you don't understand what someone did. You're right, I don't. It happened to you, it didn't happen to me. But if we wait to change, if we wait to forgive, you say, I'm not going to forgive until they ask me to forgive them, until they repent. Then your life is locked in that moment. You're stuck. And whatever it was that it was the original offense, you've locked your life to their life and their sin or their offense. And as each year passes, each week, each month, each day, whatever it is, that they don't come and say, I'm sorry. You say, but I'm not resisting it. Sure you are. Sure you are. Because the number of Christians I've known over the years, think about a place where we ministered where literally, you could take a baseball and from the front porch of one church building, you could hit the front porch of the other one by throwing a baseball. That was how far apart the two churches were that had been one church 50 years earlier. And the number of them, after 50 years, tried to get the two churches to come back together and buy a property in midway between the two and scrape both their buildings to the ground and turn them into parking lots. That was my dream. Abolish both buildings, build a new one, and turn the old places into parking lots. And the number of them that said, as long as so-and-so's alive, I'll never. We would have been the biggest church in that town, and we would have been the biggest church in that part of the county if the two groups could have come back together. But they fretted. They fretted over what their grandparents had done, what their parents had been part of, and they carried it forward and not forgiven it. And it's a real shame. Because I got to work with people from the other church. And we became good friends. But we could never, ever darken each other's doors. And I want to encourage you. Forgive. Forgive. Was it you, Donna, who was asking the question, how do you define wealth? Was that who was asking Brother Greg?
I think one or two people.
Okay. All I could hear was sound from back there. How do you define wealth? If no one can own and control your life, so that when you wake up and when you go to bed, you're at peace with your Lord and peace with yourself, you are wealthy beyond most people's comprehension. And unforgiveness creates a debt and a linkage to someone else that keeps you from ever achieving that. And that's why Christ came to set us free. Was so that the devil could no longer distract us with our sin in a sense of guilt and manipulation. And that's why he encourages us to forgive others, because it frees us from the devil having that foothold to always remind us of whatever someone else's failings are.
And if you're here tonight, I don't care what your failings are up to this point. If you'd like to put them under the blood of Christ, when we stand, when we sing, come forward, we'll help you do that. You say, but brother, I've stumbled, I've fallen. How can the Lord take me back? He took back Peter. I think he would have took back Judas had Judas not made his own choice. Judas locked himself into his own doom. His blood is good once for all time to make you clean. He lives forever to make intercession for you so that the devil cannot distract you by your own sins. The devil won't have to distract you by other people's sins. And if there is no debt of sin, what was it our Lord said? Therefore, if the Son shall make you free, you shall be free indeed. And that kind of freedom, the world cannot buy. It's been bought with the blood of Jesus, which is the greatest price ever paid.